When we hear the word corruption, most of us picture the exact same thing. We imagine a few greedy individuals waiting until nobody is looking, breaking the rules, and stealthily grabbing cash from the pot. But imagine a different kind of game. In this version, the player doesn't have to sneak around. They can just walk right up and take the money in broad daylight while everyone watches, because the official rulebook explicitly says they can. Today, the most devastating form of corruption comes directly from the rulebook. These laws were quietly rewritten to help powerful financial entities profit off of the most vulnerable people in our society. This diagram compares the two realities. Someone sneaking a few bills off the table is a problem, but that isolated theft is a drop in the bucket compared to a systemic funnel. This structure seamlessly moves billions of dollars of wealth straight from the bottom of the board directly to the very top. To actually stop this massive drain on our communities, we have to stop spending all our energy hunting for individual bad apples. We have to look closely at how the rules of the game were rewritten and who they were rewritten for. Let's look at one specific page in that rulebook, the foster care system. Originally, this was designed as a public safety net, built specifically to help struggling families get back on their feet and stay together. In the late 1990s, the rules changed. A strict administrative countdown timer was introduced. Under this rule, if a child remains in temporary care for 15 months, the state is legally forced to permanently sever the child's legal ties to their parents, regardless of the family's actual progress. This flowchart shows a timeline becoming a transaction. A child enters the system and an hourglass begins. When time runs out, the government pays a cash bounty to a private agency. If that placement fails, the agency is paid a second time. By paying for repeated moves, these rules structurally penalize the hard work of keeping families together. Instead, they provide a lucrative, continuous supply of vulnerable kids for the private market. Massive Wall Street investment firms noticed these guaranteed government payouts. Realizing how profitable the foster care sector had become, they started buying up local, community-based youth care centers across the country. Once they buy a center, they force the local office to take out a massive bank loan. That borrowed cash isn't spent on upgrading facilities. Instead, it's sucked out of the agency and pocketed as a special payout by Wall Street investors. The local community center is left completely drowning in debt. To survive those huge loan payments, they slash staff wages, reduce safety protocols, and cram kids into degraded facilities, pushing centers right into bankruptcy. This chart compares standard companies against these acquired centers. A normal healthcare company carries debt around 3 times its cash flow. Wall Street-bought centers are forced to carry debt over 7 times their cash flow. When care quality drops for these kids, the system works exactly as the rules intended. These laws prioritize Wall Street debt payments over human lives. You might be wondering how these giant firms manage to siphon off public taxpayer money without triggering massive alarms from government regulators. The rulebook allows these firms to hide their wealth by routing it through a maze of confusing tax forms and offshore shell accounts. This lets them report the local office is broke on paper, while moving massive profits to safe places the government can't see. These exact same mechanics, shell accounts, confusing paperwork, and offshore banking, are what allow illicit trafficking syndicates to clean their money. Because the rules are written to hide corporate wealth, they also provide the perfect cover for criminal activity. Consider the financial enterprise of Jeffrey Epstein. His accountants used these identical banking structures and offshore loopholes. By engineering transactions to fall just under reporting limits, his network bypassed anti-money laundering alarms completely. The government agencies tasked with oversight effectively protect both predatory firms and illegal groups. Because they all use the same financial operating system, a legal fiction written to hide one inevitably shields the other. Bankrupt foster centers and untouched criminal wealth are the predictable results of a loaded rulebook. Because this is an issue of written rules and not some invisible conspiracy, we have a clear path forward. Society has the power to rewrite the legislation, close these loopholes, and stop the drain. First, we can mandate strict federal caps on the amount of debt any private company is legally allowed to take on if they receive public child welfare funds. If you take taxpayer money to care for kids, you cannot use heavy debt to extract that money for yourself. Second, we can explicitly ban complex real estate tricks. Sometimes a firm will force a care center to sell its own building, only to rent it back to them at a huge markup. By severing taxpayer subsidies for any company that does this, we remove the profit motive entirely. Corruption is simply the board we are currently playing on. By targeting these specific financial mechanisms, we hold the ultimate power to rewrite the rules and finally stop the game. Corruption is often defined as a series of isolated incidents. Under this model, rogue actors temporarily subvert otherwise functional democratic systems through episodic malfeasance. However, rigorous forensic, sociological, and political economic scrutiny suggests a more deeply entrenched reality. This advanced paradigm, known as installational corruption, analyzes how government policy, high finance, and elite criminal networks intersect. It views this convergence as a mathematically optimized architecture. Within this framework, the commodification of vulnerable populations functions as a deliberate feature of the global political economy, rather than a malfunction of it. Understanding this system requires a layer-by-layer deconstruction, starting with statutory triggers, examining financial capital extraction, and concluding with administrative obfuscation. This reveals mechanical links between two distinct worlds: Wall Street private equity firms rolling up child welfare agencies and global human trafficking syndicates. By analyzing the raw financial ledgers, we can track how these enterprises move money and hide assets using identical protocols. This analysis suggests these vectors of exploitation operate on the same legal and administrative operating system. The bedrock of this architecture is the statutory trigger. A primary example is the U.S. Adoption and Safe Families Act, or ASFA, passed in 1997. This graphic illustrates ASFA's 15 of 22-month stopwatch. The law mandates that state agencies file to legally terminate parental rights if a child remains in foster care for 15 of the most recent 22 months. Impoverished families navigating substance abuse recovery or housing instability rarely meet this 15-month administrative deadline. This timeline structurally guarantees a steady supply of youth whose legal ties to their biological families are permanently severed. The law also provides federal financial incentives to the states, offering payments ranging from $4,000 to $10,000 per finalized adoption. These funds are often funneled into the operating budgets of private welfare agencies. This statutory framework prioritizes placement volume over clinical outcomes, creating a state-mandated supply of legal orphans for the privatized market. These state-subsidized revenue streams have attracted more than $1 trillion in private equity investment over the last decade. Financial firms execute roll-up strategies, consolidating local community-based care providers under large corporate umbrellas. The primary tool for extracting value from these acquisitions is the dividend recapitalization. This is the corporate balance sheet for a typical child welfare agency. The private equity firm forces the newly acquired agency to take on a massive amount of corporate debt from third-party lenders. Instead of improving care, the proceeds from this debt are immediately extracted from the agency to pay massive special dividends directly to the private equity investors. According to data from NYU Stern, private equity-owned healthcare and social care companies maintain debt-to-cash flow ratios averaging 7.1x. This is more than double the average for publicly traded healthcare companies, a level regulators define as very high or excessive leverage. To service this debt, agencies often reduce staff by more than 11% and degrade safety protocols. These financial maneuvers correlate with a 25% increase in complications within clinical environments. Through sophisticated financial engineering, the profound difficulties and trauma faced by marginalized youth are cleanly converted into securitized, high-yield shareholder value. This brings us to the final layer of the architecture: network convergence. This is where the administrative behaviors of legitimate firms and illicit syndicates begin to align. To hide extracted capital, private equity sponsors utilize vulnerabilities in IRS Form 990 reporting. They route taxpayer funds through complex offshore shell companies in jurisdictions like the Cayman Islands to avoid domestic taxation. This identical methodology of administrative obfuscation was utilized by Jeffrey Epstein to finance and protect his trafficking enterprise. Epstein's enterprise relied on specific structuring behaviors. The Bank Secrecy Act requires banks to flag any cash withdrawal exceeding $10,000. Between 2013 and 2017, his legal counsel made 97 separate cash withdrawals of exactly $7,500. These transactions were engineered to fall just below the regulatory threshold, suppressing the generation of suspicious activity reports. Both private equity firms and illicit networks utilize favorable corporate agreements with jurisdictions like the U.S. Virgin Islands, where the Epstein enterprise paid a tax rate of only 4% to shield their capital from oversight. These elite criminal syndicates do not represent a glitch. They are the predictable, mathematical outcome of an operating system optimized for high-end capital extraction. To maintain this industry, the biological origins of the children involved must be legally sanitized. This occurs through the as-if-born-to legal doctrine. In states like Texas, the government seals a child's original birth certificate in a vault and issues a forged amendment upon the finalization of an adoption. Adult adoptees seeking their own medical and genealogical history face punitive hurdles. They are often forced to already know the information they are seeking or undergo mandatory psychological counseling before the state will release their own identifying data. When these converging networks face public exposure, institutions may transition from identity forgery to active evidence suppression. Following the Epstein Files Transparency Act, a forensic audit revealed the silent removal of 64,259 files from the Department of Justice's public servers. This purge targeted Dataset 9, which contained the minute-by-minute cell search logs regarding Jeffrey Epstein's death while in federal custody. The Department of Justice utilized grand jury secrecy and administrative deletions to curate institutional memory and protect high-profile unindicted co-conspirators. While digital disinformation often distracts the public, the architects of this system are engaged in documented institutional restructuring. This is the roadmap provided by Project 2025. It is a plan to dismantle the administrative state and centralize control within the executive branch. The project advocates for the reinstatement of Schedule F employment classifications. This mechanism allows for the removal of tens of thousands of career civil servants who currently have employment protections. This enables a political purge, replacing nonpartisan policy analysts, IRS auditors, and scientists with ideological loyalists. Removing independent regulatory experts ensures that complex financial leveraging and money laundering can continue without technical oversight. Systemic remediation requires legislative patches that match the sophistication of the abuse. The first mechanism is a strict federal cap on debt-to-cash flow ratios for entities receiving public care funds, forcefully bringing debt levels below the current 7.1x average. A second mechanism involves explicitly prohibiting debt-funded dividend recapitalizations and sale-leaseback transactions in state-funded care. Any agency utilizing these to enrich private equity sponsors would instantly forfeit all access to federal taxpayer subsidies. These solutions include empowering IRS auditors to prosecute Form 990 vulnerabilities and piercing grand jury secrecy when it is utilized to protect the facilitators of transnational trafficking networks. Only by exposing the shared legal architecture used by Wall Street and illicit traffickers can we dismantle installational corruption and end the commodification of human vulnerability.